Welcome to worship with Eliot Unitarian Chapel. Wherever you are tuning in from near or far, we are so glad that you're here. I am Eliot's lead minister, the Reverend Barbara Gadon, and I hope that this is a service that nurtures your spirit. If you are new to Eliot Chapel, we are an intentional community that welcomes all races, all genders, and all sexual orientations. We welcome people of all creeds and beliefs, all economic circumstances, and all types of families. Our vision is to create a just world through vibrant, beloved community. If you would like to connect with us and learn more about our congregation, please look for information at the end of the service. Welcome to Eliot Chapel. Come into this time of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this time of memory and let its history warm your soul. Come into this time of prophecy and power and let its vision change your heart. Come, let us worship. Our chalice lighting this morning is by Albert Schweitzer. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us.
With the day's surprise, faith in bursting fresh within my heart each day. Then looking on the world with simple joy, on insects, birds, and beasts, and common weeds, the grass and clouds had fullest wealth of bow. My mother's voice gave meaning to the stars. Now when I turn to think of coming death, I find life's song in star songs of the night, in rise of curtains and new morning light, in life reborn, in fresh surprise of love.
As young as I can remember, I have always loved books. I was not exactly a discerning kind of reader. I think I went more for quantity than quality. My favorite thing was to dump out my round green tub full of books and sort of revel in them, kind of like a little like Scrooge McDuck playing with all of his money. One of my books was called Little Black Sambo. Yes, those of you who have been around a while know what that book is. And this was the mid-1960s. For you kids, that means the olden days. And my parents were of the World War II generation, and none of us knew a whole lot about anything outside of our little bubble of, well, basically our little white suburban neighborhood. And I didn't think much about that book. It didn't seem any different from the other books in my little tub. And so I kind of forgot about it. Years later, my first job in high school was as a shelver in the public library. I loved this job. And one of the things I loved about it was that they let us go into the back room where there were interesting things like the shelf of books that had been pulled from the library. And on that shelf, of course, I spotted right away Little Black Sambo. And I picked it up, and I was a little bit horrified at this book that had been just a normal everyday part of my childhood. It was hurtful to so many people. I could see why they pulled it. It made fun of Black people. And so I thought that if there was a book or a story that could ever have been considered just lost and not good for anybody, it would be Little Black Sambo. Until recently, when I came across a book called, here's the book, a book called Sam and the Tigers. And it's by two Black artists. It was written by Julius Lester and Jerry Pinkney. And it is a new telling of the story. So any of you older children who are listening to this, I mean, like, decades old children, and if you grew up with the story Little Black Sambo, I invite you to listen to this telling of it and tell me what you think. And everybody else, I invite you to just sit back and listen. I think it's a very good story. Okay, so the story is Sam and the Tigers by Julius Lester and Jerry Pinkney. Once upon a time, there was a place called Sam Samara, where the animals and the people lived and worked together like they didn't know they weren't supposed to do. There was a little boy in Sam Samara named Sam. This is him. Sam's mama was also called Sam. And in fact, so was Sam's daddy. In fact, all the people in Sam Samara were named Sam. Can you believe it? But nobody ever got confused about which Sam was which. And that's why nobody was named Jolene or Natasha or Willie. One day, Sam, and Sam went to the marketplace to get some new clothes for school. The first place they went was Mr. Elephant's elegant habiliments. Mr. Elephant liked words as big as him that nobody else could say. Sam's mother picked out a nice brown jacket and a white shirt. "That will look very handsome on you," she said. Sam shook his head. "Uh-uh, that ain't me," he declared. "Don't you be talking back to your mama like that," Sam said. "Well, I'm a big boy now. I can pick out my own clothes." Sam looked at Sam. Sam shrugged. Sam shrugged back. Sam nodded back. Sam and Sam looked at Sam and nodded together. And Sam grinned. Sam looked through the clothes like he was searching for the truth. Finally, he shouted, "That's what I want!" And he held up a coat as red as a happy heart. Sam began to protest. "You can't wear something like that." And Sam stopped. "Sam, he's a big boy now. We've got to let him make his own decisions." So Sam paid Mr. Elephant for the red coat, and off they went to Monkey's magnificent attire to look for pants. Sam found a pair of pants as purple as a love that would last forever. Sam shook her head, sighed, and paid Mrs. Monkey for the pants, and off they went to the feline's finest finery to look for a shirt. Sam picked out one as yellow as tomorrow. "Yes," he shouted. And then he found a pair of shoes, shining like promises that are always kept at Mr. Giraffe's genuine, stupendous footwear emporium. Sam paid Mr. Giraffe and closed her pocketbook. "That's it," she declared. "We've got all your clothes. We are going to go home." And Sam shook his head. "Well, I ain't through yet. You got a new coat, a new pair of pants, a new shirt, and new shoes. What else do you need?" "I'm not sure, but I'll know it when I see it," he said. Sam followed Sam throughout the marketplace. He looked and looked and looked until finally, yes, he pointed to a green umbrella, as green as a satisfied mind. Sam paid Brer Rabbit, and they went home. The next morning, on the first day of school, Sam put on his new clothes and looked at himself in the mirror. "Ain't I fine?" he declared. Sam went downstairs to breakfast, his new clothes shining brighter than Mr. Sun when he comes back from his winter vacation. Sam had to put on sunglasses to protect their eyes from the colors that Sam was wearing. "You better be careful," Sam said. "You might put Mr. Sun out of the business." "If I knew how to sit in the sky without a chair," said little Sam, "I would." Sam and Sam kissed Sam goodbye, and as he headed off for school. Sam had not gone very far before he saw a tiger coming towards him. The tiger stopped and looked at Sam. Sam stopped and looked at the tiger. "Sam, I'm going to eat you up," said the tiger. Sam shook his head. "I don't like that idea. Why don't you take my red coat instead?" Tiger looked at the coat. "Nice coat." "It's a deal, Sam." So Sam took off his coat and he gave it to the tiger. And the tiger put it on. "Ain't I fine?" said the tiger. "Yes, you are," agreed Sam. Tiger went on his way, and Sam went on his. Before long came another tiger. The tiger stopped and looked at Sam. Sam stopped and looked at the tiger. "Sam, I'm going to eat you up." And Sam said, "I don't like that idea. Why don't you take my pretty yellow shirt?" And soon it was that they had a deal. Sam had kind of an idea of what kind of day it was going to be. And when he saw the tiger coming next, he took off his shoes. "Here you go," he said, holding out the shoes. And the tiger said, "Good deal for you, bad deal for me. I have 4 feet and there are only 2 feet, Sam said. "These are ear shoes." and the tiger put them on. "Ain't I fine?" he said. "You are indeed," Sam agreed. Now, Sam didn't see any point in moving, and sure enough, along came another tiger. Sam said, "Here," Sam said, offering the tiger his green umbrella. And Sam went on his way, hoping that he wouldn't see another tiger. All he had left were his purple pants. No, his pants. Before his hope had time to take a good long look around, here came another tiger. "You know the routine," said the tiger. Sam nodded, took off his pants. "Take 'em." Tiger put 'em on. "Ain't I fine?" he declared. "I could care less," Sam pouted. "Look at me." Sam stood there in his underwear. "Bad day, Sam," the tiger said, and went on his way. Sam started crying. He cried and cried and cried. Sam might still be crying if he hadn't heard a loud and very scary noise. What was that? "It's the tigers. They don't like my clothes, and they've come back to eat me." Sam hid behind a big tree and peeked out. In a clearing, he saw the tigers strutting around in a circle. "I'm the finest," said the tiger in his red coat. "No way, insect breath. I am the finest," said the tiger in the yellow shirt. Declared the tiger with the yellow shoes on his ears. "I am finer than you two losers." "No way," proclaimed the tiger, carrying the green umbrella on his tail. "I am the finest." "You make me laugh," snorted the tiger, wearing the purple pants. "I am the finest tiger that ever is, was, or will be." And there they are. I love the tiger with the shoes on his ears. I think that's great. The tigers were so angry that they were ready to fight. Tiger took off his red coat. Tiger took off his yellow shirt. Tiger took off his purple pants. Tiger took off his yellow shoes. Tiger let the green umbrella drop to the ground. They snarled and growled and snapped at each other until suddenly they were rolling and wrestling and wrestling and rolling on the ground. They rolled and wrestled and snarled and snapped right up to the tree where Sam was standing. Sam ran to the clearing and peered out from behind the green umbrella to see what was going on. The tigers were running around the tree, each one holding the tail of another tiger in his jaws, each trying to catch the other. "Hey, tigers," Sam called. "Don't you want your clothes anymore?" The tigers ran faster. "If you do, you better say something. If you don't, I'm going to take them." The tigers ran faster and faster. Sam put on his yellow shirt and his purple pants, his red coat, and finally his silver shiny shoes. "Ain't I fine?" he said to the tigers. The green umbrella up like a victory flag. The tigers saw Sam wearing their clothes, and that made them very, very, very angry. But they wouldn't let go of each other's tails. Instead, they ran faster and faster until all Sam could see was a blur. Faster and faster and faster and faster, the tigers ran until they melted into a pool of butter, golden as a dream come true. See, there's the butter. Sam hurried to school, and everybody agreed he was wearing more colors than Mr. Sun when he went to bed. Yep. But that afternoon, Sam was going home, and he saw the pool of butter gleaming at the base of the tree. He ran home, got a jug, and filled it with the butter. He gave it to his mother. "Can we have pancakes for supper?" he said. She made the batter and started frying it in the butter. The pancakes were striped orange and black, just like the tigers. "We're going to have more pancakes than we can eat," Sam said. Why don't you go and see if the neighbors want to join us for supper? A few minutes later, Sam and Sam came back with Miss Cat, Mr. Elephant, Brer Rabbit, Mrs. Monkey, Mr. Giraffe, Brer Fox, and Brer Wolf. They were talking about the happenings in the community. Seems like 5 tigers had disappeared that morning, and nobody could find them. Sam smiled, but he didn't say a word. Everyone sat down to eat, exclaiming that these were the best pancakes ever made on the front side of the earth. Sam ate 27. Sam ate 55. But Sam ate 169. Wearing all them colors can really make a boy hungry. The end. It's the end of our story. Thanks for listening, everyone. I invite you now into a time of prayer and meditation. If you wish to, you may plant your feet flat on the floor, straighten your spine, close your eyes or leave them open, but have a soft gaze and follow your breath. And hear these words by the poet, the Sufi poet, Kabir. Inside this clay jug, there are canyons and pine mountains, and the maker of canyons and pine mountains. All 7 oceans are inside, and hundreds of millions of stars. The acid that tests gold is there, and the one who judges jewels. And the music from the strings that no one touches, and the source of all water. If you want the truth, I will tell you the truth. Friends, listen. The God whom I love is inside. Let us tell stories of mothers by the Reverend Maureen Killoran. Let us tell the stories of mothers, stories that could be true. Let us tell of warm mothers, soft and round, likely to be found with flour on their nose, and always ready to pour you a glass of milk to go with the cookies on your plate. These mothers are increasingly rare. Let us tell of mothers who are like bubbles of champagne. They surprise your senses, leave you giggly, but when you least expect it, they erupt with an unexpected pop. Stories that could be true. Then there are grouchy mothers, stressed mothers, exhausted mothers, faces lined with worry and spirits tired and gray. Other mothers are wise and reliable, not prone to many words or to a lot of noise, but you know that when you need them, they'll be there. Let us tell of fierce mothers, the ones who will love you even when you're wrong. And let us tell also of absent mothers whose memory shimmers at the edges of your heart. Let us tell of distant mothers, cruel mothers, loving mothers, giving mothers. There are walk-away mothers, save the world mothers, too busy mothers, and mothers who make you cry because you lost them, mothers who make you cry because you can't. Stories that could be true. May we hold in our hearts the mothers we have known, those who have loved us, and those who tried. May we forgive the mothers who didn't get it right and try to release the knots of disappointment, anger, grief, and pain. May we hold in our hearts the truth that mothering, nurturing is a task that belongs to us all. However old or young you are, whatever your gender, may you make extra room for nurturing in your life this week. May you say something real to a harried store clerk. Give a coworker a genuine compliment. Take time to listen deeply to a friend. I invite you to remember, reflect, and create anew the stories of love and nurture from this point forward stories that could be true.
One of the traditions here at Eliot Chapel that we really treasure is the tradition of giving away half of our offering every Sunday to an organization in the community that is working to put values that we treasure into action, to make them real. And this month, the organization we've chosen is Metropolitan Congregations United, of which we are a member congregation. Metropolitan Congregations United puts faith into action by developing leaders who move their congregations, organizations, and communities to change public policy for the common good. The leadership of Metropolitan's congregation is diverse and exceptional. One of the issues they've been working on really hard, for instance, is to take down the school to prison pipeline. African American children in our community are much more likely to end up in juvenile detention, much more likely to end up in prison. And this process starts in their schools. And so we have been working in partnership with Metropolitan Congregations United to end this. It has to stop. It has to stop damaging our community and damaging our families. Just to give you a little taste of how things are done at Metropolitan Congregations United, I've got a little snippet of their last annual meeting.
The goal of this meeting is to remind us as we live through this historic confluence of COVID-19 and American racism, that the work we're doing to protect the right to vote and to ensure participation in an equitable democratic process is indeed sacred work, worthy of our lives. Even now, the highest offices in this state and in this country are determined, and we can see it almost wherever we look, to show us that Black life will only matter as a means to white supremacist progress. We are gathered today to reject this lie. We've come together because even now, the voice of the divine urges us to press on for freedom and justice. I thought that we should first acknowledge that we're pressing on right now in the work of freedom and justice in a historically difficult moment. We're organizing, y'all, for change and resisting state oppression in the midst of a global pandemic. And that pandemic is taxing our social and emotional resources in ways that are unprecedented. And so as we open, I just want to invite us to be mindful of our breath this afternoon. In moments like these, it's crucial for us to be honest with ourselves and others about how we are doing and how we are feeling, even if we don't have time for lengthy exchanges on this call. It's crucial that we're honest with ourselves and that we prioritize self-care, because one of the trademarks of white supremacy is allowing humans to labor and suffer with little to no acknowledgement. And so we resist that. Friends, in this moment, as we gather to press on, it is okay if you find yourself laboring with significantly less fuel. It is okay if you're finding yourself in need of more or new or different kinds of rest so that you can show up to work in whole and healthy ways. Family, it is okay. It is even okay to not be okay right now. It's okay if you're finding yourself at the end of your wits or with your faith seeming to waver. Regardless of how you are feeling right now, it is okay, and you are not alone. You are invited. We are invited to be fully here, just as we are.
So what we see in this section is that not only does Metropolitan Congregations United push forward, but it also takes care of the people who are leading, who are organizing, who are emptying their hearts into the issues that matter so much to them. Our goal this month is to raise $1,300 through our shared plate, with $650 going to MCU and $650 going to Eliot Chapel's many life-sustaining ministries. Let us be a generous people.
What books did you love as a child? What stories shaped you growing up, and why? I asked this of our group when we were discussing the theme for May, which is stories. And Steve Menerick said that he loved Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel, but he was at a loss when it came to explaining why. Because it had a happy ending, he said. We all suspected that there was probably more to it. Children's books, especially picture books, occupy a tender place for us. We were introduced to them before we could form complete sentences. They came to us at bedtime when we were snuggling in our pajamas as grown-ups read to us, and we got to peer closely at the pages, which were beautiful sometimes, or funny, or interesting. The best children's writers are those who can remember what it was like to be a child and can write that way and draw that way. They can see and appreciate what matters to children. As children, I believe we know this. We know instinctively when something is made for us. More on that later. So why talk about children's books to a group of mostly adults? Well, educator Herbert Cole writes, you may wonder how much attention a children's book merits, but more people in the United States have probably read Babar, for example, than have read most bestsellers and classics. They buy the book for their children and read it together. It becomes part of people's cultural heritage and cultural baggage, depending on how you look at it. Children's books have power. I love children's books, in case you can't tell. Catherine Rundell, who's a children's author, said that children's books say, the world is huge. Hope counts for something. Bravery will matter. Wit, empathy, and love will matter. We need to have our imagination seen as not something extra or optional, but basic to our humanity. And children's stories get this. Catherine Rundell writes, children's fiction necessitates distillation. At its best, it renders in their purest, most archetypal forms hope, hunger, joy, fear. Think of children's books, she said, as literary vodka. They pack a wallop. So sometimes for our time for all ages, I like to choose a book that has been around for a long time, like Harold and the Purple Crayon. Harold was published in 1955, which means that 3, maybe 4 generations can enjoy the story at the same time in different ways. There is something magical about books that span many generations. In a church, it is all too easy for families with young children and people who do not have young children to be seen as separate groups, having separate, even conflicting needs. And for one moment in the story, we are all together. And I treasure that. I remember reading Green Eggs and Ham once in church here. And I enhanced the story with a squirt gun and a broom handle with stuffed gloves pointing here and there. And when we finished the story, we were all breathless with laughter. And I said, so what did you learn from this? And the kids said, don't say you don't like something before you try it. Somebody else said, don't judge a book by its cover. We could have easily ended the service right there, I thought. The message has been spoken. It was literary vodka. Which is why I have to say I struggled a few years ago when Dr. Seuss started to come under fire with charges of racism in his books. Dr. Seuss? I thought, really? And part of my reluctance, I think, came from genuine bewilderment. I just didn't see it. I'd heard about the cartoons and the ads that he drew in the 1930s and the 1940s, and they were bad. But that was his earliest work, right? Surely he is allowed to have evolved over time. What I remember most were creatures that had hot pink or neon green fur and were unintelligible as to gender or race. And some of his books were explicitly anti-racist. In the speeches, you even had some recognition that racial differences were exploited by people wanting to make money. Enter Sylvester McMonkey McBean. But if you look closer at some of the books, you will see caricatures of Arabs, Africans, and Asians, including If I Ran the Zoo, which had a Chinese man with slits for eyes, drawn for eyes, and had this man as one of the exhibits that the narrator was playfully describing would be in his zoo. I never saw those parts as a child. I probably skipped over them. People and children and families of color can't do that. Children know, remember, children know instinctively when something is for them. They also know when something is against them. On March 1st of this year, Seuss Enterprises pulled 6 books because of racist content. And there was a backlash. Some said they're canceling Dr. Seuss. Now, canceling someone, or cancel culture, means that someone in the public eye has been banished because of their behavior. It is the most current version of the term politically incorrect, a term I've also hated, by the way. Both of these terms are, I think, are so dismissive, so cavalier in brushing off any call to someone to be accountable, any call for us to have empathy that people are being hurt by our culture. So let us remind ourselves that Dr. Seuss has not been canceled. He has not been banished from the common culture. 6 books out of 50 that he wrote have been taken out of publication. The organizers of Read Across America, an event created in honor of Dr. Seuss and his contributions, the many books that he wrote specifically to help children with reading, the organizers of Read Across America announced that, well, they would not be emphasizing him quite as much in their campaign. Maybe give some new voices a chance. And similar criticisms have been made about Babar and its depiction of colonialism, and about the Little House on the Prairie books, which depicted Native Americans cruelly and celebrated minstrel shows. And each time this happens, these criticisms are met with anger or fury or dismissal, mostly from white conservatives, because children's books have a lot of power. We are having an intense conflict in America about the stories we tell our children and ourselves. I would call it a debate, except that we are so lousy at talking about it. Just last week, the Rockwood School District had a town hall meeting where parents, mostly those who objected to critical race theory being taught in our schools. Critical race theory teaches kids to think critically and question what they're being told through a lens of systemic racism. They teach that racism is not a few mean people, but it's a whole system. It teaches honestly about slavery. And in this meeting in Rockwood, the white mothers said that their children were traumatized by this, saying that they were now ashamed to be white, and they called it child abuse. Both the school superintendent and the director of educational equity have announced their resignations at the end of the year. The district confirmed that they have provided home security for both the superintendent and the director of equity because both have received death threats. So present at this meeting were some state representatives who were questioned about the House Bill 952. HB 952 would, quote, essentially eliminate discussion of race, gender, and other group identifiers in schools. And parents were asked to support it. At least that was a general mood at this meeting. This type of ban would, this type of elimination, truly is cancellation, in my opinion, and it includes curricula that it would impact curricula that many of our parents at Eliot love to use with their children, with our children, and it's called We Stories. This is a terrible bill that there's just being kind of snuck in and preventing the conversation from happening in our schools. I would say that the wounded but mighty arm of white supremacy is hitting back hard. And I found that just deeply dispiriting, heartbreaking, really. So how do we respond? Well, it's clear that our voices are needed in this discussion. We could join the people of We Can, which is doing excellent and anti-racism work in our schools. We have some Eliot members that are active in We Can. There needs to be more of us speaking up for our UU principles of the inherent worth and dignity of every person, of justice, equity, and compassion, and a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, especially in children's stories, because children's stories are powerful. Now, as for the stories themselves, well, read Dr. Seuss if you want, or at least the stories that we know that don't have harmful stereotypes, and be open to learning that maybe something you think is harmless really isn't for someone else. Have the conversation. Read Babar if you like. Read Little House, but don't just think the words are going to speak for themselves, because children are going to absorb messages unquestioned, even and perhaps especially the messages that we skip over. So talk to children about things that are harmful in the books. Harm done to all children, by the way, including white children who are being lied to with these characters, with this whitewashing to somehow protect their innocence. They're being lied to, and such lies poison their spirits and traps their minds. And I cannot name a child who is not absolutely furious about being lied to. The old stories can be changed and should be changed for new generations of children. Some of them, I understand, are just too painful, too chock full of problems, but it is possible for some. In the oral storytelling tradition, for example, stories are fluid, evolving, and never told exactly the same way twice. We need some of this limberness now. Part of that is to cultivate a willingness to hear from people who have been hurt, even and especially when it comes from an old favorite. We need to have the courage to face that. We need to be able to allow for new tellings of stories, and I think especially by those who were hurt by the original, as we saw so brilliantly done with Sam and the Tigers. We need to be able to have books that show us many, many kinds of people having adventures, learning about love, kindness, and bravery. We need to give some newer books a chance to become classics, to have the same kind of tender and special place in a child's heart, because they heard the story in your voice while they were sitting on your lap, nodding off to sleep. Especially look for Black and brown people, their voices telling the story. Allow me, if you would, to close with a story of hope. Last year, when the actor Chadwick Boseman, who starred in the Black Panther movie, died tragically, suddenly, a woman named Erin Polson wrote a tribute to him in an open letter. You should know that Erin Polson is white. She writes, "In May 2018, I was newly Queen of Newcastle at the Georgia Renaissance Festival. Black Panther had come out just 3 months before, and it was on everyone's mind. I was still learning how to queen, as the shoes before me were large, and pavilion time was always a time when I felt particularly inadequate. It was one of my insecure days when I had a young Black girl and her dad come and visit the royal court. I introduced myself as Queen of England, and the girl said, "I'm a princess." And then she got shy. I wanted her to keep talking. So I said, "Oh, are you a princess of England?" She shook her head. "Are you a princess of France?" Another head shake. I don't know why. I'd never done it before, but I thought I would take a chance. "Are you a princess of Wakanda?" Her eyes grew so big. Her father jumped with excitement, and she nodded regally. I crossed my arms over my chest. "Wakanda forever, my princess. We are so honored to have you in our kingdom." Now she stood 100 feet tall. I touched my colleague Joshua Miller's shoulder, who'd been carrying on a very different conversation as King Henry, and said, "My dear Henry, we have a visiting guest from Wakanda." Without missing a beat, his arms crossed over his chest. "Wakanda forever, dear princess, and welcome to England." That shy girl walked out of the pavilion with her head held high like an empress. And I remember her dad just dancing next to her, whispering, "Wakanda, sweetheart, they know you're from Wakanda. You're royalty too." Erin Poulsen concludes her letter. "Mr. Bozeman, I've worked Renaissance festivals for almost 20 years now. Since that point, I have seen dozens of Black boys and girls accept themselves as royalty in a way that I'm not sure they would have before. The doors you opened echo throughout time, like Arthur pulling the sword from the stone." Children's stories are powerful. And this sort of thing, this sort of encounter can happen, but it will not happen without our cooperation. We need to seek out and know these stories that will make children feel 100 feet tall, especially those who have been made systematically and generationally to feel so much less. Remember that most children's stories were written first with one or two children, particular children in mind. Alan Arthur Milne wrote the Pooh series for his son Christopher. In 1942, a writer named Bose Haywood wrote one of my favorite children's books, The Country Bunny and the Little Gold Shoes, a gorgeous, feminist, anti-racist book about Easter. And he wrote it to his daughter, Jennifer. These books were written for one child, two or three. But as the books were published, these stories carried some of the love that the parents had for that one child to more children. Friends, we have to somehow imagine how we can widen our own hearts to imagine more children. We need to be able to love more children and to be brave enough to speak out for them. May we seek out and tell the stories that free our children and free ourselves. Amen.
For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We mothers of time. We are daughters of dust and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy and brothers of love. We are lovers of life and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage and fathers of time. We are daughters of dust and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy and brothers of love. We are lovers of life and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are.
Now may the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us now and always. Amen. And go in peace.